Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith back this time with the main card predictions for UFC 249. This is a tough one to call because even matchups, what I'm assuming going into this is that most fighters who had notice, meaning enough time for full camp, they all had equal problems making the camp happen. You know what I mean? Of course, they didn't get the sparring partners they wanted. They maybe didn't get the strength and conditioning they wanted. Gyms aren't fully open. I talked to Rosen last week for MMA Tonight, and he talked about they had a thing at American Top Team where you worked out like 45 minutes individual. Like each fighter had a slot during the day, like 8 to 8:45. That's your time. They went in, had a couple of coaches work with them, and then somebody else comes in so that no one's in the gym. Not 5 people aren't in the gym at the same time. You don't get a full camp that way. But what I'm assuming with these picks is that everybody's kind of in the same boat. What we might see in this fight are atypical performances because of that. Fighters that have great gas, if they didn't get a full camp, maybe that won't be there for them. Fighters that rely on their timing, maybe their timing won't be perfect. Fighters that feed off crowd energy, there's no crowd. So we might see some really off-kilter performances. So your guess is as good as mine when it comes to how this card's going to shake out. These are my best guesses, essentially, when it comes to picks. Greg Hardy, Yorgan De Castro. Look, Greg Hardy is a former football player. He's just more athletic than most mid-range heavyweights. He's going to beat most guys that are just big and hit hard. We haven't seen, I don't think we're going to see that next level skill set. We saw in the Volkov fight that doesn't have a huge toolkit, doesn't know a lot. When things go wrong, doesn't have a lot of fallback plans, doesn't have the highest fight IQ in the world. Well, he hasn't been doing it that long. So the thing is that being light on his feet for his size and being athletic for a heavyweight will take him through the mid-range of the UFC heavyweight division. And that's what Yorgan De Castro is. He's a mid-range UFC heavyweight. Undefeated 6-0. We saw against Justin Tafa, he can hit hard, but a lot of heavyweights can hit hard. So to me, if Greg Hardy stays on the outside, stays behind his jab, moves a bit, mixes in enough takedowns to maybe wear De Castro out, he can win this fight. So it's going up to that next level that's going to be hard for Greg Hardy. As long as he spends his career opening up pay-per-views, taking on mid-level heavyweights, he can win for a long time simply because he has more athletic talent than most heavyweights. So I would say Greg Hardy probably by decision over Yorgan De Castro. Jeremy Stephens, Calvin Kattar. I've been a Calvin Kattar fan from the beginning. I think he's an excellent fighter. I love his versatility on the feet, cuts good angles, attacks from... has a variety of attacks and uses them very, very well. Very accurate with his strikes. He had at one point 7 decisions in a row. And recently we started seeing more power. Knocked out Chris Fishgold, knocked out Ricardo Lamas. So we've seen some power. Of course, came up short against Zabit Magomedsharipov. But I think Magomedsharipov is the future of this division. So both of those guys have a loss to Jeremy Stephens and Calvin Kattar have a loss to Zabit. That doesn't bother me at all. I think Zabit is just excellent. He's going to have trouble in long fights, however. But that doesn't make me think that Calvin Kattar isn't what he's been built up to be, anything like that. So Jeremy Stephens, once again, been a fan of his forever. It's just, are the losses catching up with him? He's lost 3 in a row. There was a no contest in there with the Yair Rodriguez eye poke. Hasn't looked, washed up in a sense, but in a division where you need a lot of speed, you need a lot of energy, you need a lot of enthusiasm, has Jeremy Stephens just been through too many wars to summon up the performance he needs, I think, against a young gun? And my guess is no. Once again, very close fight, but I would have to go with Calvin Kattar. I think he pulls out another decision against a very tough Jeremy Stephens. I think Calvin Kattar just a little bit busier, a little bit lighter on his feet, cuts a little bit better angles, and makes Jeremy Stephens work harder than he wants to throughout the fight. So I would say Calvin Kattar, probably by decision. Francis Ngannou, Jairzinho Rosenstruck. Oh my God. I talked to, once again, Rosenstruck last week. Look, my thought pattern here is in circumstances like this, you get 2 knockout heavyweights, who can do more? That's my usual thought when I look at a fight like this. Who's more versatile? Who can do a little bit more? In this case, it's Rosenstruck. I like his combinations a little better. He's a little more versatile. His footwork's a little bit better. Francis Ngannou is the George Foreman of MMA right now, meaning dude just hits hard. his combinations aren't blisteringly fast. He isn't super accurate. He has legs like tree trunks, doesn't angle a whole lot. But when he hits you, it is over. Over. Now, Stipe Miocic didn't beat Francis Ngannou by standing and trading with him. He picked him apart on the feet when he could, but it was takedown. It was ground control. It was veteran versatility. It was knowing when to take a risk to get the fight where he wanted. It was a lot of pressure on the ground. Didn't take a lot of unnecessary risks. And at the end of that fight, if you remember it, even when Ngannou was throwing punches that were like super slow and labored, Stipe still respected it. Rosenstruck is kind of coming at this fight with the I see gaps in his striking. I'm going to take him apart and I'm going to knock him out. I'm not saying that can't happen. I'm saying I think that's the wrong strategy against a guy who hits as hard as Ngannou. When I visualize this fight, the reason I am leaning toward Ngannou is it's hard to find a scenario in my head where Rosenstruck strikes with Ngannou for an entire 15 minutes and doesn't fall for the big shot. Just like George Foreman, the Michael Moorer fight, Michael Moorer was outboxing Foreman that whole fight. And then Foreman lands one and we have a new heavyweight champion. That's Ngannou. That you can stand and box with this guy, but unless you can knock him out, unless you can land that shot that finishes him, he's dangerous the entire 15 minutes. So I think Rosenstruck does outstrike him for a while. I think he, at some point, will get overconfident and Ngannou will land that big shot that ends it. And, of course, I could be wrong. Rosenstruck has knockout power in his own right. I just don't see a kickboxing-centered strategy having success against Ngannou for as long as it needs to, which is the entire fight. Either you finish him or you keep this pressure up the whole time without him landing that one shot that's going to put you away. And at this point in his career, I think that's asking a little too much. So I'm barely going with Francis Ngannou. Henry Cejudo, Dominick Cruz. Maybe the most compelling fight on the card in that there's so many question marks around it and so many ifs and all that stuff. I did a breakdown for a gambling website this morning, and they said the over-under on how long this fight's going to last is like 4.5 rounds. And the guy was saying, you take the under. And I said, I completely disagree. I think Dominick Cruz, even if you pick Henry Cejudo in this fight because of the time off and all these things, Dominick Cruz is a crafty veteran who moves around like crazy. So it's hard to land clean punches against this guy. And when you do, he's slick enough and smart enough to stay in the fight. And if you look at fights he's had in the past where he does get hit, if you rush and go after him, he has a counterpunching style that will make you pay. And so even if Henry Cejudo, who's not necessarily a knockout puncher at 135 pounds, of course he did knock out Marlon Moraes, but he doesn't have a lot of one-shot power. And so I think what we're going to see is a versatile attack by Henry Cejudo, and I think it will be a matter of Henry Cejudo wearing down a Dominick Cruz who hasn't fought in 3.5 years, hasn't won in 4 years, didn't get a complete camp. I think that's going to be more the key to victory. If you look at the Cody Garbrandt fight, every time he would hurt Dominick Cruz, what did he do? Get up. I'm not going down there. I'm not aggressively attacking you and allowing you to get back into the game with some tricky move that I wasn't ready for. Very smart fight by Cody Garbrandt. So I think same thing for Henry Cejudo. If he does hurt Dominick Cruz, he does not want to get stupid and go in there and try and swarm him. So I think it's going to be a long fight. I think the time off works against Dominick Cruz. I think coming off the first loss he's had in years against Cody Garbrandt, that might hurt him a little bit. Short camp, all the intangibles favor Henry Cejudo. Now, Dominick Cruz has come back from long layoffs before and has looked great. I think at his age, long layoff, not a complete camp, against a fighter who can do a lot of things, meaning the wrestling, the striking. I think it's just a bad combination for Dominick Cruz. Do I think Cejudo finishes him? No. I think it's a decision. But the intangibles make me lean toward Henry Cejudo. Who wins in their prime? Dominick Cruz. But we haven't seen a prime Dominick Cruz in a long time. This guy has had 9 fights in 10 years. He's just been inactive a lot. That eventually catches up with you. I think it catches up with him in this fight. So, Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje. Okay, usually when I go with my gut, or not go with my gut, when I go against my head, I end up regretting it. But with this one, my logic is Justin Gaethje admittedly had a short camp, admittedly doesn't want a long fight. I think we see the Justin Gaethje of old. And by of old, I mean Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier, World Series of Fighting. I think we're going to see that guy. Simply because he's gotten smarter in recent fights, right? If you look at the Barbosa fight, look at James Vick, at setting up that knockout shot, being a little more patient, getting his timing just right, and then boom, nailing it. I don't think he wants to do that against Ferguson. I think he goes out guns blazing and wants to go to war. Ferguson will engage him in that war, and we've seen fighters who didn't have the credentials of Tony Ferguson hurt him. He's not the most sound defensive fighter in the world. He tends to take his shots, keep going, and hopefully wear his opponents down and get something funky later. If he gets past round 3, this is his. I think Justin Gaethje starts out going to war. I think Ferguson accepts that challenge, and he gets dropped. That's my prediction. It's, once again, who knows what's going to actually happen, but I think we're going to see an old-school Justin Gaethje performance. And also, something that's not getting enough press, in my opinion, is Ferguson's camp is too long. He was supposed to fight April 18th. He had to kind of stay and did a test cut, and has had to stay at that peak from April 18th to May 9th. That's a long time. And I think that's going to wear him down. He won't be as crisp simply because a camp that's too long is just as bad as a camp that's too short. Justin Gaethje is getting a short camp, but Ferguson's getting a camp that's too long. So fighters train to peak at a particular time, and when you extend that, it wears you down a bit. And I think we're going to see a slightly worn down Tony Ferguson against a Justin Gaethje who, even with a short camp, has 2.5 rounds in him, and I think that'll be enough. I'm going with Justin Gaethje by knockout. So we'll see how it goes. This could be all over the place, and I expect it to be all over the place, but enjoy, and I'll be back when it's done.